To remain updated with the latest business news, click on the bell icon.
Hi, folks, you're tuned into Business Today. Now, you must be reading or hearing this term stagflation quite often these days. So, what exactly is stagflation? Let's try and understand in this video. Stagflation refers to an economy that is experiencing a simultaneous increase in inflation and a stagnation of the economic output. Now, stagflation happens when growth is stagnant, there is high unemployment, and high inflation all combined together. Now, the term stagflation emerged during 1973 to 1975 recession when most of the developed economies, including the US and the UK, experienced a rapid and high unemployment as a result of oil shock, high inflation as well. The US had also slipped into a recession. And that exactly was a situation which was termed as stagflation. So, why is there a risk of stagflation now? Well, in the current scenario, the war in Ukraine has actually sent oil prices soaring to nearly $140 a barrel. In fact, oil prices are nearing 100% gain on a year-on-year basis. Apart from crude oil, the other commodities in the agri space, in the industrial space, wheat, metals, natural gas, all have now surged to record high levels as well. And this has sparked fears about stagflation, a toxic combination of red hot inflation and low growth or negative growth. Now, with the world still fully to escape the COVID 19 pandemic impact in the economies and the supply chain concerns, the climbing cost of the raw materials increasingly threaten a twin blow on companies, on consumers, with faster inflation, weaker demand, something that exactly happened back in the 1970s. The question is whether economies at this point in time will be able to deal with something like a stagflation or another recession, just 2 years barely after the pandemic forced economies into a slump not seen in many decades. Now, this is a worry that stagflation would actually sharpen the trade off between expansion of the economy and inflation. Governments are under severe pressure to offset the pain via greater spending that they have been incurring over the last 2 years with subsidies to protect the poor from the higher energy costs. Meanwhile, the central banks also will have to now tread very, very carefully on balancing the low growth with high inflation, even as US Federal Reserve still seems to be raising the interest rates. In India, the GDP growth for FY22 released by the National Statistical Office showed disappointing numbers. It revised the GDP growth for FY22 lower to 8.9%. And now there is a high uncertainty of what could this war have an impact in the overall economy in the next year as well. Now, the slowdown in growth has been accompanied by a steady rise in consumer prices across the globe. US, you're already seeing inflation is at a 40-year high. Similarly, all the other nations are looking at higher retail prices as well. In India, it's a 7-month high of 6% in January, and it's at 6%, which is the upper limit targeted by the central bank for a long-term period as well. Now, the recent sharp surge in crude oil prices in agri commodities and industrial commodities does risk a further upside to this inflation level as well. Apart from core inflation, the other immediate threat to headline inflation is the likely increase in the domestic petrol and diesel prices because of this rise in crude oil prices as well. Remember that petrol and diesel prices have remained frozen since early November ahead of these elections. Now, with the elections past us, soon there is an anticipation that OMCs will start to rise interest rates because they are losing quite a lot. Because of the rise in crude oil prices and them not being able to raise petrol and diesel in tandem as well. So experts say that even if there are, say, no sanctions on the Russian oil and gas import by Europe or by US as well, the supply disruptions due to this war will ensure that energy prices remain high in the medium term. So the retail prices of petrol and diesel are sure to surge, and therefore it can derail the current inflation forecasts of, say, 6% and then 4.5% for the next year, which the RBI has done. Now, with the GDP growth slowing more rapidly than expected, inflation threatening to move up, the macroeconomic scenario has been drastically recast, and the policymakers will have to go back to thinking as to how to deal with this. Rising inflation also leads to a drop in the currency's purchasing power. Therefore, it will hurt demand, which will ultimately impact growth as well. So, is there a solution? you ask. Now, there is no definitive solution to a situation like stagflation. According to economists, there now has to be a rise in production to the level that it leads to higher growth while inflation still stays the same. And when the level is achieved, it would then prompt the central banks to tighten the monetary policy. Now, this is quite easily said than done, but theoretically, it is the right way, economists say, to prevent stagflation in the first place. For now, it is a wait on watch as to how the RBI and the government together will look at this new challenge at the hem. And that's what exactly stagflation means.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share, and subscribe.